learned, and starting, dovetailing off of the first comments is we have to downplay expectations that you'll know who the winners are on election night. If there's any question that we're not going to know. I'd be shocked if we did. Perhaps in some very, one-sided races, but that's where we have to work. Working with the media is trying to explain and educate them that, the results are not going to be known. And accuracy is what's more important, and integrity in the system. We have what we've trying to reinforce and certainly work as we get closer to the election is that, we have a system in place to make sure that eligible voters, and certainly ones that are alive, and that's part of the process when the application comes in, that a board should review that application to see that they are a registered voter, and B, still should be an active voter. So, that's list maintenance, is making sure that those get done. So there's procedures in place for that. But it's an open process. So, we've always had a process where poll watchers and candidates and campaigns can also see who the list of registered voters are. It's not a secret. We'll give that list out to anybody, but it has a risk because then people can start mining that for, let's hope, for nefarious purposes, but we should be able to catch that. Lessons learned, have more people available after the election for unpacking the materials from election day, where you'll have additional absentee ballots that need to be counted. Having staff available and setting up a process to allow the campaigns to come in and watch you count those ballots. That needs to be open and transparent. And that's a challenge in a normal environment. It's even harder now where you're required to keep that distancing and the safety that's required when you're bringing all these people together. That's a whole additional challenge that, we are facing, that's unprecedented. And, we haven't talked about it, but, certainly, for the primary and for the June is, okay, we have to put in place the proper personal protective equipment for not only the poll workers to make sure that they will work and feel comfortable, but the voters themselves. And on top of that, we're still working with, and Congressman Davis mentioned this earlier, is the cybersecurity threats that are still out there. And a lot of that is we've hardened our infrastructure on that. Thank you again for the federal grants that came about for that. But that's, again, not one and done. That's, that's a new lifestyle for the counties to address and work on that. So, there's a lot of lessons as adding people, making sure that people understand that it will take time to get the results, but also understand that we have a system in place that provides those checks and those verifications to make sure that registered voters, and there's also a challenge procedure for the candidates and the campaigns to get involved with that we will not get rid of. I mean, we can't, even in a COVID environment, we have to allow that to happen. So, I don't know if any of the other boards want to weigh in on that.
Well, Todd, I want to push back just on the election day outcomes. Every race is not the same. As we saw in the primaries, there were races that were called, there were races that were uncalled, and the timing is different for each race. That's going to be the case for each of these congressional districts. And frankly, it's going to be the case. It differs across the country. So I think, I would like your thoughts on that, to say that it's different depending upon the margins and each district when those races will be called. And then you're going to see a disparity in terms of some voters are more likely to vote absentee in more urban centers than other parts of the state, we're finding.
No, absolutely. Just one thing that it's hard, again, it's hard to correct this, but the Board of Elections doesn't call the race on election night. What they do is get the results in, and we publish those publicly so people can see transparency where they are on election night. And then as we get to the process, we make available how many, right now, how many absentees have been applied for. You'll know how many get returned. You'll have an opportunity to go through that. One of the challenges we always face is, my opponent hasn't conceded. It's like, we're going to count every ballot. It doesn't matter if it's a 1-vote victory or a 2,000 vote victory. Every ballot will get counted, and that will take time. And we are scheduled. A presidential year like this produces a very tight deadline. in order to produce results for the Electoral College. We're required to certify that by December 8th, which is approximately a week ahead of when we normally would certify an election. It's about December 15th. So that puts great pressure on trying to get those results so that the Electoral College can meet, and obviously they'll elect the president. So, we're trying to get the results again for the congressional office holders that want to take place on January 1st. Our own state legislature is up this year, in addition to, thousands of local offices. So again, the Board of Elections isn't calling a single race.
No, I know they're not calling it,
results.
but we will know the outcomes as we did in the primaries. Some of the outcomes were known of some of these congressional primaries, not the case for others.
And that's true. Again, it's easier if it's a smaller race because there's less ballots to count. But the bigger the race is and the tighter the race is, that means it's going to take longer to get those results. And that's part of that is our job is try to educate the media to understand that. And I think there's been some understanding of that, but there's always pressure to try to be the one to report who the winner was, and that's not the Board of Elections' job. Our job is to make sure that winner is the accurate winner and that those ballots all get counted.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Elise. Appreciate you being here and taking the time. I want to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Zeldin. You're recognized.
Well, thank you, Congressman Davis, and to my colleagues on the call. It's great to join you. Thank you for everyone who is here to answer questions, to provide your insight, the experts who are on this call. Nick LaLota from my home district here on the east end of Long Island, located in Suffolk County. It's great to see you. And I certainly hope that, and I know that you and your teams are working very hard to ensure that it goes as smoothly as possible. The laws, the directives that come down are often from, whether it's the governor or the state legislature, in some cases it might be a court, and you're just trying to roll with what you're given to do your jobs as exceptionally as you possibly can. So I thank you for your service. As we go through the next couple of months, it is certainly my opinion that every eligible voter in New York should exercise their right to vote. If you can go vote on election day or early voting, to please do so. If you can't, we have a process for absentee balloting in the state if you can't vote on early voting or on election day. You spent some time talking about resources, and I appreciate you getting into that as well as what you have and what else you need. There's been some discussion here about ballot integrity, and I wanted to ask a question or two about that. Before I do so, I would just say for state leaders, whether it's the governor or the state legislature, one of the things that I've noticed over the course of the last several months is that the directives keep coming out drip by drip by drip. And I think that it would be very helpful for our leaders around the state to have as early notice as possible of any of the changes that are going to get made. And the fact that there's uncertainty here in the middle of September as to what other changes might get made as you adjust to very recent new orders that have just come out, I think it's really important on leaders. It's an important quality of leadership to be consistent and to provide that notice so that you guys can do your jobs as best as you can. On the ballot integrity point, I just wanted to better understand a process. New York has instituted this green light law, and the law is now evolving where a person can qualify for a driver's license who's not documented, and there's when you go into DMV, you would opt in if you wanted to be registered to vote, and that law is now changing to give you the ability to opt out of being registered. We've had an issue historically here in Suffolk where people have registered to vote and actually voted who were not eligible, who were not in our country legally. We were notified of them because as part of their own citizenship application, they requested to be removed from the voter rolls. So they send in their notice, they let us know, they let the Suffolk County BOE know why they want to be removed, but we have a bunch of paperwork of people who actually registered and voted. Can you just walk us through the process? If somebody goes in for a driver's license at DMV, and that's the beginning of the process. At the end of the process, say Suffolk County Board of Elections is receiving an update to the voter rolls. Where in that chain of it going up through DMV and then down through BOE, is it vetted out if somebody is registering themselves to vote and they're not eligible through that process instituted through the green light law?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. And if there is such a process, and I don't think there is one, maybe Todd Valentine can speak more to it, it doesn't happen here at the county. We have asked for tools, and we talk about resources, and I'm confident we have probably the right amount of dollars and the right amount of employees. But as far as resources go, we don't have the proper amount of rules and laws and regulations to fetter out that sort of nefarious activity. And maybe somebody who's not in our country legally, goes to the DMV, as you described, Congressman. They apply for their license because now they can. And now the state automatically registers them to vote unless they check a small box saying that, no, they don't want to get registered to vote. I would presume some of that happens intentionally, probably a larger amount happens unintentionally, but whatever the case is, the end result is a large amount of folks who are not in our country legally getting put on our rolls. And I don't have any tools. I'm not allowed to, as an elections commissioner, ask anybody who from the U.S. Department of State or anybody else who has citizenship, who has a social security number or anything else. So I have no tools here, Congressman, but sure, I wish I did.
Anybody from the state level have anything to add?
Yeah, well, it is a process that starts at the DMV. It's part of the two pieces of legislation that have been passed recently, which is online voter registration, and then the automatic voter registration, which will be, as you said, the opt-out, so to speak. And it starts at DMV. As the lead agency for where most of the voter registration applications come through. Certainly, their online portal with our agreement and design, but it still requires, as Commissioner Lota pointed out, the voter to check something properly. If any voter comes in and checks that they're not a citizen, they don't get to the voter registration application provisions. They're just by the system itself. If they check that box, now if they don't check the box and say that they are a citizen, then it's going to go through and get that application. And just as he pointed out, it's very difficult on the back end because there is no list of citizens that's ever been given to any state or county across the entire country. And other states have asked for it and have been denied by the federal government to do any type of validation against that list. So right now we're reliant solely upon the voter to check the appropriate box on the application that, yes, I am a citizen, or if they don't check the box, we validate, hey, you forgot, it's an incomplete application. That's the one good thing DMV does. If you say you're not a citizen, you never see the registration application, but it still relies upon that voter to do the correct thing. And that's very difficult if there's no other way to validate that in any manner.
Thank you. And I'm going to yield back now to Congressman Davis. I would just sum up by saying I would like every eligible voter to vote. I don't want a single ineligible voter to vote, and every eligible voter should vote just once. I'll yield back.
Thank you to my good friend, Mr. Zeldin. Well said, and I appreciate the comments and the questions. I'll turn it over to the newest member of our congressional conference, Mr. Jacobs. Welcome aboard, and you're recognized. Still on mute though, buddy.
Thank you very much. I wanted to first just comment on Congressman Zeldin's questions, which were very good. Certainly one of the main reasons I voted against the green light law in the state Senate, and my source of reference was I was the county clerk in Erie County. We ran the auto bureaus there as an agent for the state, which is very common throughout the state of New York. We were agent for the DMVs. And, you know, for many, many years, we worked very hard to make registering to vote very easy at our auto bureaus and in DMVs around the state, which was a very good thing. But it was never anticipated about this green light law, and there was not, and there is not, sufficient checks and balances to make sure that these registrations of ineligible voters happen. And now, as Representative Zeldin mentioned, that they went further to the opt-out. You know, these are just a couple strokes on a tablet at the counter when you're going in to do a transaction, and the customer service representative, motor vehicles representative, is not really allowed by the law to really assist much in that person doing that. And, you know, if it's a person that even is well-intended but may have a language barrier, really not understand the process, not understand what they're hitting, if they make that wrong stroke and register to vote very easily, that's shot right over to our Board of Elections. They are on the voter rolls, and there is no check on that. So it is a concern, and I think that it's something that really needs to be addressed. I just wanted to comment there's a very good discussion, and I, you know, recently was elected to the Congress, and I ran in the election in June. I actually had 2 elections on one day. And so the absentee ballot process was very much part of that election. And I can't tell you for any of the Board of Elections commissioners that are on here, I just wanted to say how hard everyone worked during a very difficult time throughout my district to do their job in a very difficult time with a very new process, limited staff during COVID, and they did really the best they could. A lot of late nights and limited staff. So I am, you know, hearing from a lot of my supervisors and a board of supervisors, which is very common in my district, that major increase recommendations from their Board of Elections for budgets, because they're just envisioning this is the somewhat new normal, and there will be a lot more cost to do what they need to do. And I'll talk about why I think that the EASE Act is so much needed. I also wanted to comment on Representative Zeldin's mention on the changing mandates or directives from the state. I couldn't agree more that the sooner the better. Actually, I would hope now the directives are made and no more, so they can get transmitted to the Board of Elections and then in turn get down to the voters. Because I think one of the things I saw, because there was a lot of directives going, and we understood that COVID was an ever-changing issue, but that a lot of my voters, I believe, because there was such a discussion on absentee voting and universal absentee voting and so forth, that we had a lot of voters who did not understand that they could still vote in person. And we want to get that message out, because some people are just not comfortable doing anything but going in and voting in the polling location. And we want to make sure that they know that. And I just think when a message is made, the directive's made as soon as possible, and then let to get out, that will help everybody. And I just wanted to conclude by saying to Elise and Rodney that this EASE Act is sorely needed. Our poll workers, this has always been a problem, even prior to the changes in COVID, that we have an aging group that's doing that, and we need help. And also, clearly, assistance in terms of cleaning up the voter rolls. I mean, you know, my house, I still get mail from somebody who lived there three families ago, and the Postal Service does vetting a lot more, purging a lot more than we see in our Board of Elections. It just needs to happen, because it's just prone to mistake and abuse. So I thank you for that. I look forward to being supportive of the EASE Act and helpful in any way to make sure that those who want to vote absentee this time around can do so, that it's done with integrity, and those who want to come to the polling locations can do so as well. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, my good friend Chris. Appreciate you joining us, and also you made some very good points too in regards to in regards to the EASE Act. I appreciate your support on it. I think it's something that as we move into, as we go back to Congress next week, get back to DC, I hope it's something that the majority Democrats will take a look at and listen to our local elections commissioners and officials and understand that they need resources to get people to be able to go to those polling places. There's no better example than your election, the special election and the primary election that you ran in at the same time. But as we look back, I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'm not going to take my entire time, but I do want to bring up an issue that I'd like the two local election officials who are on the line to possibly address, and Mr. Valentine too, quickly if there's time after they're done. But you look at the primary in just this year, more than 1 in 5 mail-in ballots were rejected in New York City alone. And also, according to the Election Assistance Commission, and if you have any issues with the statistics I give here, Palmer's on the line. You can trash him after this is over. But they estimated that New York State rejected 34,000 mail-in ballots, or about 14% of those absentees that were submitted. That seems to be a problem. That to go along with the story that Mr. Lalota just mentioned about having an absentee ballot request come in from somebody who they knew was dead when that application came in. I want you also to answer whether or not you think it's a good idea based upon these issues. Should we do what the National Democrats in Washington want us to do? Should we mail live ballots rather than applications like the one Mr. Lalota mentioned was intercepted? Or would that cause more problems for your local election officials too? So with that, Mr. Seymour, I see you're on the line. Let's give you a chance to answer these first.
Sure. What I would say is absolutely not. We should never mail live ballots to people. I think our voter rolls are the best that they can be, with the information that we're given, but there's certainly a lot of information that we lack. I think Congressman Jacobs just mentioned that there are outdated information for his own residents that's happening. So absolutely not in live ballots. I would like to say that the rejection rate is sometimes a feature and not a bug. We are doing a validation where we are tossing or setting aside ballots because they do not have they have mismatched signatures. They lack a signature at all. That's a voter fraud protection prevention thing that we do. So when you see a number that is a big number, you just understand that that actually is the system working as it should, not necessarily some evidence of voter fraud. I won't say that voter fraud doesn't happen. I know that it does happen, but I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Mr. Lalota.
So I'd agree with Commissioner Seymour in that the general mailing out of ballots to all registered voters is not a good idea. It would only exacerbate what we all understand of the fraud by coercion. The privacy booths that we know about at our early voting locations and traditional voting locations stand for the premise that the individual filling out the bubbles and inserting the ballot into the machine is the one casting the ballot mainly by his or her own independence. When that ballot goes into the home, maybe travels to the workplace or elsewhere, and there are other people in the room around the person who is purportedly filling out the ballot, we have to appreciate the fact that some influence is going to be exerted over that individual who may not ultimately, when that bubble is filled, that may not be the representation of that individual's preference. And the more we erode at that privacy that those booths, those privacy sleeves in a polling place provides, the less accurate ultimately our election results will become. And none of us, Republican or Democrat, should want that. So I agree with Commissioner Seymour. The general mailing out of ballots to people who don't request them is a bad idea. It would only exacerbate that issue. To your first question, Chairman, about, I forgot what it was. It was about why so many ballots were rejected. It's mainly a function of a postmark stamp not being on it, it arriving at the board past the deadline, and a lack of a signature. Those are the three biggest criteria why absentee ballots were rejected. Voters have been more educated about that, and the language that is going to be on our absentee ballots, the envelope specifically, will tend to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the amount of voter errors that go into those three big error areas.
Great, great. Mr. Valentine, do you think, based upon the knowledge we now know, that the majority of these votes that have been rejected in the primaries throughout this country have disproportionately affected younger voters and voters of color? Do you believe that New York State is more prepared to reduce the rejection rate and has offered proper educational opportunities for voters to understand how to make sure their absentee ballot is counted?
Certainly we're trying, and part of what Commissioner Lalota pointed out was we've redesigned the envelope that the ballot's actually in, so at the point in time that the voter is doing that, they understand you really need to mail this on time, and you really need to make sure that you've signed it and had the appropriate provisions there. But on top of that, and a mixture of both the governor's executive order, a statute, and a lawsuit, we're providing a provision for those voters who may have inadvertently not signed the envelope to come in and provide a cure for that within a very limited time window through a verified affidavit. So, even that, we're addressing that as well. And certainly we've been working well with trying to get the word of what the post office has advised for timely mailings. And as both Commissioner Seymour pointed out, I mean, it's, the ballots being rejected are a function of following the statute, and obviously it does help prevent fraud where things are, the signatures don't match. You need to make sure that are accurate to make sure it is that voter casting that ballot.
Right. Hey, thank you very, very much. Hey, with that, I know we're a little behind schedule, but I appreciate everybody being on the line. For those members of the media and any of my fellow colleagues and local election officials, and also Commissioner Palmer, we're going to open up in a couple of minutes for your questions. Those who have to leave because of other time limits, please feel free to drop off. But I do want to just give Mr. Seymour and Mr. Lalota just about a minute each, if you want to take it, to offer any comments, possible quick question for anybody else, and before we close this out and go to the press portion.
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to give the committee feedback regarding our process. We're in extraordinary times. 2020 is unlike any other election year that I've experienced, and probably anybody on the call has experienced. We've adapted, we've improvised, and we're overcoming some of the challenges that COVID presents to us. We're doing so here in Suffolk County in a bipartisan manner, trying to ensure that as many qualified registered voters have access to the ballot as possible, while ensuring that we ensure the integrity of that process as well. It's a two-part process about access and integrity, and I thank the committee for giving us commissioners the opportunity to highlight how important that process is.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me today. I'd also like to thank the advocacy that you all showed in getting the Federal CARES Act money that is absolutely necessary in at times like this. And I want to thank the congressman and my Congresswoman Elise Stefanik for their support of the EASE Act. That sounds like a great opportunity for us to improve our elections. And I look forward to hearing how that materializes in hopefully the coming days and weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks everyone for being on the call. If you have to drop, please do. I do know that we're coming up to the 11 o'clock hour out in the Eastern time zone, 10 o'clock here, but I know some other folks have things that they have to get on. Otherwise, if you want to stay on the line, you may be welcome. You may be asked to participate, but if not, thank you for being here. And if you are going to stay on the line, we're going to open it up to our members of the media. If you do have video capability, it might be good to turn it on right now so we can see you raising your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I'm going to turn it over to the communications director for the Committee on House Administration Republicans, Ashley Phelps. She will be running the question and answer session. If you do want to use the chat feature, feel free to use it. And we will we'll go to first to Nick Balasi. Nick, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your first question.
Thanks so much, Congressman. And thank you for doing these discussions. They're really helpful to hear from local officials and then how it affects the national situation with the added influx of ballots. My first question for you would be for you, Congressman, and anyone else who'd like to chime in, but you've probably seen the concerns regarding voting twice. In Georgia, there's been about 1,000 cases of people who voted by mail and then they showed up in person to also cast a ballot. Are you concerned about that? And what safeguards do you want to see put in place to prevent that situation as more people vote by mail and then might think, let me show up as well in person just in case to make sure my vote's counted?
You know, great question, Nick. This is a problem. This has been a problem. And this goes back to what many of my Democratic colleagues, they decide to push off as oh, it's so rare that we shouldn't really care about these instances where there's fraudulent behavior, like the folks you mentioned in Georgia alone. There were over 1,000 people who voted twice. That dilutes the votes of other registered voters. And as somebody like me, I have won races by 1,000 and 2,000 votes respectively. Every vote counts. And if you dilute the votes of people who have cast their ballots for me by voting twice, then that's illegal. It's wrong. But the main problem I think we've had in this country and at every local level is that those instances where people have double voted have been rarely prosecuted. We've got to do what we can to make sure that our local prosecutors realize that a vote fraud is a crime that needs to be dealt with, just like other crimes that are happening in our communities. It's not an innocent crime. What it does is it allows others to think that they can get away with it to the scale that we saw in Georgia. So that's been something that's been very concerning to me. Obviously, I think this is why we have to make sure that our local election officials are cognizant that these instances happen. And what's happening in Georgia with the prosecution or the hopeful prosecution of these individuals who have been identified, that light has now been shown on the process and illegal behaviors. It wasn't too long ago, a few weeks ago, that we saw a whistleblower talk about how he committed vote fraud and allowed others to commit vote fraud in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania areas. I think that was pretty telling about how he said he used the process to allow people to go in and vote illegally. I think that should be a good guidepost as to why we have to be vigilant. And I think it should be something that all prosecutors, both at the state and the federal level, they need to be aware of. And they need to show that there's some seriousness in really prosecuting vote fraud and those who corrupt our electoral system. Any of my other colleagues want to chime in on this? All right, seeing none, I do want to go to Jerry with the Buffalo News next.
Thank you for doing this. I kind of have a double-barreled question. First of all, for Mr. Valentine, and then for Congressman Jacobs and Congressman Reed, if he is still on the line. For Mr. Valentine, we've been hearing so many concerns about delays in mail these days, in mail delivery. How concerned are you about that? And what would you suggest to voters who want to vote by mail as to when they should vote? And after you weigh in on that, I'd appreciate if the two congressmen could weigh in as well. Thanks.
Well, obviously we're concerned about it. We've been in constant contact even during the June primary. What we've done to that extent is we've provided information. Actually, one of the executive orders required us to provide a mailer out to every registered voter, which is on its way as we speak throughout the state. And part of that mailer reminds voters, it tells them the options for how they can vote in person, and gives them their polling place. Early voting gives them those polling places and the hours. And then obviously if they choose to vote by absentee. And what we put in there was a reminder that based upon what the Postal Service told us is that we would recommend that if they want to apply and just vote by mail, then they need to do that at least 15 days before. It's not statutory, but we certainly recommend it. And we also recommend that when mailing a ballot, they follow, again, the Postal Service guidelines. We put it right in the mailer, is that you mail a ballot at least 5 days prior to the election. So it's there in time to be received, postmarked, and then be received in the 7-day cutoff after the election. So we're reminding every voter in this state of that option through the mailer. And we're hoping to get the word out. And certainly we're putting that as part of the instructions on the envelope to remind voters to mail that on time. So we are working to try to get that. And obviously the Postal Service, part of that is when mail goes out, that it gets designed properly to get delivered to the voters, and that it is identified as election mail when it comes back. So that when it comes back to the mail stream, the Postal Service knows to identify that and expedite it to its recipients on the receiving end.
Okay. Congressman Jacobs?
Yes, yeah. I think what Todd had just said is great advice and a great message that I hope is getting to anyone that is entertaining voting by mail. The only thing I could add is I did meet recently with the Western New York Letter Carriers, the union, about a variety of issues, and they stressed to me that they don't foresee any problem with being able to handle any level of capacity that is being foreseen for the November election. So they are ready. They process a lot more in Christmas cards than this, and they feel that this is not going to be an issue.
Mr. Reed, are you still there?
Nah, Congressman Reed had to go. He had another appointment. I'll go ahead and turn it over for a follow-up question to Nick Balasi. I apologize, I missed you there.
Oh, that's no problem, Congressman. For you and other lawmakers in the call, as well as the election officials, if they'd like to chime in, you've seen social media companies like Twitter fact-checking President Trump, who's warning about voter fraud, saying that mail-in voting is safe and that voter fraud is not widespread. And national Democrats have been saying the same thing and pushing for mail-in voting, expanded mail-in voting, live ballots, saying it's safe. What's your response to that argument that because voter fraud is not widespread, using their language, we should proceed as normal, and they don't seem as concerned as the Republican side? What would be your response to that, and why you think it's the case?
I'll go back to my comments before. As somebody who's been in close races before, I won my first race by less than 2 votes per precinct. If there was a small amount of fraud, the election could have gone the other way. And just to put it into perspective, some Democrats that year in 2012 won by smaller margins. So fraud matters. Every single incident of criminal behavior in our electoral process, if it permeates the system, then it becomes more widespread, like we see now in Georgia, where they've identified 1,000 people who actually cast 2 votes in the last election. That is something that our policymakers need to be aware of. Fraud is bad. Fraud happens. It's not just because it's rare when you look at it as a percentage. It has caused us in Washington to not seat a member of Congress. In North Carolina's 9th district in the 2018 election, there was vote fraud and illegal ballot harvesting done by a Republican operative. Fraud isn't a partisan issue. And we didn't seat a duly elected Republican member of Congress. Went to a special election, and Mr. Jacobs can tell you how interesting those special elections are compared to a normal election cycle. And we won that seat again, but not without making sure we didn't stand up and say, fraud's okay. That person in North Carolina is likely to go to jail for using and abusing a process that is completely legal in a state like California. You can go back and see some of the areas where we've been talking about on that Committee on House Administration Republican side. We've talked about the danger of mailing live ballots to every registered voter that my colleagues in Washington, the Democrat side of the aisle, want to do and keep trying to do time and time again during this Congress. We also have seen in California alone, Secretary of State Padilla was a witness at a hearing a week ago where he actually didn't know if they removed already identified dead people off of their voter rolls. How are you the Secretary of State and you don't know if your local election officials, after they've already been identified, have removed dead people? At some point, you've got to take serious every instance of behavior, not just from the voter, but from those who are in public office who are also doing their work to corrupt the process, like Secretary of State Padilla identified for me and many others just last week. So with that, anybody else want to chime in, Chris or Lee? And if not, we'll go on to one more follow-up, and then I know we got to be going here in a few minutes.
Okay, I think I get the follow-up here. Congressman Davis, one question here. You raised these concerns about people voting twice, voting in person and in the mail. What do you think what President Trump had to say about that last week?
Don't do it. It's illegal.
Okay.
All right, I think we are out of questions, so.
All right, well, thank you everyone once again. Appreciate everybody's time. It's a great opportunity to discuss something that's very timely coming up in 54 days that will impact every one of us on this call. So appreciate the time, and until we meet again and go to another state to talk about these issues, I will now close out the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.